It's been almost a year since Sabrina released her album Men's Best Friend, whose cover attracted immediate controversy. It features Sabrina on her hands and knees in a black midi dress while an anonymous male figure cropped out of frame grabs her hair. A companion promotional image showcases a dog with the album's name written on its collar. The implication is far from ambiguous. She is comparing herself to the dog, loyal, submissive, and obedient to male control. Critics have called the image offensive, appealing to the male gaze, and reminiscent of the treadwife aesthetic, which romanticizes the subordination of women. However, the songs on her album suggest a completely different meaning. Far from feeding into male fantasy, Sabrina talks about her frustration with dating men. On the lead single Man-Child, she calls the men she dates as stupid, slow, and useless, and ultimately refers to them as man-child, men who are adults, yet mentally resemble children. Even as she mocks them, she admits that she keeps dating them anyway. I like my boys playing hard to get, and I like my men all incompetent. I swear they chose me, I'm not choosing them. The song traces a cycle, dating an incompetent partner, getting frustrated, break up, and yet in the next relationship encountering another incompetent partner. With regard to the song, the meaning of the album is one of self-mockery, a satirical commentary on the absurd and self-degrading lengths that women endure in modern dating. By exaggerating the traditional tropes of female subservience, her marketing aims to highlight how, ironically, the men that women fawn over often prove to be deeply incompetent or undeserving of the devotion that women gives them. Yet, however well-meaning Sabrina may be with her cover, critics argue that the audience consuming that image may not necessarily receive the irony. Without listening to the songs in the album, the cover produces a very old visual trope of female submission, which is a problem in itself. Glasgow Women's Aid, a charity supporting survivors of domestic violence, called the cover regressive and accused it of pandering to the male gaze and promoting misogynistic stereotypes with an element of violence and control. The cover was not subtle or sex positive. It's just soft porn pandering to the male gaze. It doesn't read as satire, and if you have to explain it to everyone that it's satire, you didn't do a good job. At best, Carpenter's cover is a bad example of satire. It's titillating to those who do believe women are inferior. The criticisms are not made without good reason. We are in fact living in a climate where violence against women is on the rise, where the treadwife lifestyle has been normalized and where Roe and Wade has been overturned. Although gender equality seems achieved long ago, it seems that feminist gains are not irreversible. In light of this, how women are being represented and how they choose to represent themselves is crucial. If the audience completely misses the intended irony, the work can result in confusion, or worse, the audience might agree with the literal and potentially harmful meanings being parodied. However, an album cover is quite different from just another random image or advertisement on the internet, because an album cover is the cover for an album, just like the cover of a book. If one is intrigued by the cover for good or bad reasons, they are invited to actually listen to the album and then to discover Sabrina's actual intentions with it. Anyone who actually bothered to listen to the album would at least realize that Sabrina is not trying to degrade herself, but to say something else. Helen Coffey of The Independent says that the cover's detractors know literally nothing about Carpenter, her music, or her brand. I am a little concerned about people's inability to immediately clock that the cover is obviously a commentary on the ways that women are being treated. Even taking the cover at its face value, it seems unfair to condemn Sabrina for failing to make explicit the meaning behind her cover. Sabrina is an artist, not a political activist, and holding her to the standards of an activist may be far too demanding. She doesn't have to explain to everyone what her art is about. Art doesn't have an obligation to be easily understood. The album is never expected to be the feminist propaganda. As she says, the album is very much up to interpretation. One might look at a cover and see it as regression, others may see it as empowerment. Sabrina has no obligation to adjudicate between the two because that would lose the meaning of art completely. It is undeniable that Sabrina, as a well-known artist, holds a lot of power in influencing people. However, she's never the cause of women's oppression. The cause is patriarchy itself. It's alarming to see how so many people rush to criticize her as if she committed a crime against all women. Sabrina's cover may carry associations with women's subordination, but those associations need to be read against the context of the album, not just being assumed automatically. Sexual innuendo in art shouldn't be read as inherently shameful by default, and a woman's submission in a relationship doesn't automatically point to female subservience. It's true that Sabrina's cover could be read alongside or even co-opted by pornographic imagery, and that some men may bring impure intentions to that reading. But that response belonged to those men, not to Sabrina. Yet one might still ask, if Sabrina is aware that these possibilities or risks exist, should she not have avoided publishing or using that as the cover? But this would then mean that women should be responsible for men's reactions, which is absurd because people should be accountable for their own actions instead. The trend of women appealing to the male gaze as an act of taking ownership of their femininity is so regressive and dangerous to the younger generations. The same thought of porn and OnlyFans is liberating, where the porn industry abuses and objectifies women. It's scary to see people idealizing this lifestyle so that so many women work their whole adult life to escape from. Now, there's a lot to unpack from this comment. First, it said that Sabrina is appealing to the male gaze. But what even is the male gaze? The concept traces back to Jake Lacan's psychoanalytic theory of the gaze as an act of objectifying the person being viewed. Historically, sexy clothing was read as evidence of a woman's presentation existed for males' visual consumption. This objectifies the woman because it reduces her to an object of desire rather than a desiring subject. However, in our current world, the same outfits don't necessarily signal male gaze appeal. Dress choices can serve self-directed ends, such as comfort, self-expression, in-group signaling, rather than male approval. Self-sexualized presentation may be a valid expression of empowerment, confidence, or personal pleasure. While Sabrina is depicted as submissive by her posture, this does not necessarily mean that she is subservient. Submission staged and performed for the camera is not the same as submission without choice or without agency. However, if we push the argument further, is it the same if a celebrity promotes porn or OnlyFans, saying that it's liberating? The answer is no. It would be completely different. But before I go into my reasoning, I would like to stress that Sabrina is nowhere close to doing this. The porn industry is categorically different from just one suggestive photo. The industry is oppressive because it doesn't just depict objectification, but it enacts and reproduces it as a structural practice via coercion and trafficking. On the other hand, the case with OnlyFans is a bit more complicated because it seems that participation is genuinely voluntary. If someone chooses to objectify themselves for money, then what is the problem with that? However, if we look closer at this argument, the crucial bit lies in the fact that the choice is freely chosen. But how free would this actually be? In a world where this industry is still heavily stigmatized, why would one turn to this industry if equally viable alternatives exist? And who is actually benefiting from the entire system behind the scenes? Even if Sabrina keeps complaining about men in the album, men is still the center of the album, and ultimately, men are still the one in dominant position. Now, to respond to this, I think that writing about someone doesn't necessarily make them the person in the dominant position. Instead, the album is still Sabrina's own narrative about her dating experiences. It's her experience in dating men, but not men themselves being the center of the album. It's also worth pointing out that writing about your former partner is not a gendered phenomenon unique to women. Many male artists write about their exes equally as frequently, often without their work being read as centering the women in question. Romantic relationships are a significant part of most people's lives, so there's nothing wrong with writing about your ex, regardless of the artist's gender. Now, the final question is Men Best Friend cover feminist? To ask this question is to ask whether it works to subvert the patriarchy and oppressions that women face. Choice feminism holds that any action a woman freely chooses is, by definition, feminist. But I'm a bit skeptical about this because then almost anything would qualify as feminist. If we follow this logic, a woman in the Victorian era might equally believe that marrying a man she doesn't love is an empowered decision. She might see giving up her own passions for domestic fulfillment as feminist. This is absurd because it fails to recognize that choice is socially conditioned, and women may not always know or act reliably in pursuit of their own interests. Choice feminism argues that all choices are valid. However, not all decisions contribute to systemic change towards gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. So the mere fact that Sabrina chooses her own cover does not necessarily make the act a feminist one. I do not deny that Sabrina's cover is traditionally associated with the male gaze and sexually appealing to men, etc., etc. There is, however, a case to be made that the cover functions as satire, a way of exposing and mocking misogynistic expectations of women and their sexuality, rather than servicing them. Adrian Horton of The Guardian argued that Sabrina was clearly working in the Madonna tradition of sexual provocation for provocation's sake, poking fun at tropes and people's prudishness with an alluring frankness. Similarly, Jessica Clark argued that Sabrina was not reinforcing objectification, but rather skewering it. On this reading, the cover holds the male gaze up for ridicule rather than feeding into male fantasy. However, is it actually meaningful to take the cover out of context and then rush to criticize it? Is the album actually what people think it is about? Taking the album as a whole, I read Men's Best Friend less as a feminist statement and more as an acknowledgement of the dilemmas and contradictions facing her generation, of the flaws in the culture that she's operating within, and of her own flaws and contradictions in dating as well. Most of the backlash comes from an over-analysis of the cover and what the cover is visually associated with, before even trying to understand where Sabrina is coming from and what she's trying to say with her album. So, is the cover regression or empowerment? I don't think that's the most important question to ask. The cover can be read as submission, can be read as satire, empowerment, self-expression, everything all at once, and none of these readings cancel each other's out. There is a cost to demanding that every image resolve into a political verdict, when the only two available readings of an album cover are feminist or not feminist. The image is no longer allowed to simply be. The ambiguity and open-endedness of art itself is its value. Forcing a political verdict onto every cultural artifact risks destroying art itself. Emma Spector of Vogue described the backlash to the cover as a product of a depressing, puritanical society. The controversy reveals less about Sabrina's own politics, but more about a culture that has lost its tolerance for images that can't be immediately categorized. Sabrina is not posting on a policy platform. She's not required to resolve the contradictions of modern womanhood, dating, and desire. She's allowed to simply describe them, however messy, however contradicting the narratives appear to be. If this video made you see something differently, or if you disagreed with part of it, let me know in the comments. Have a wonderful day or evening. See you!